We coming in. It's been a busy morning. I tell you, I hope everybody's had an opportunity to participate in one of the sessions, either with Coach Carter or one of the sales customer service sessions. If you can't find a little enthusiasm in those, it's going to be hard to find enthusiasm today, because I tell you what, it's been kind of incredible, everything that's going on. We're really excited about the new format of our annual meeting and the opportunity to provide several different options for those that are participating. But I will tell you, the one thing that we do know is that at MEC, there's no question that when it comes to policy issues, that there's a great deal of interest in those. And we definitely have one today that is at the top of the list, and that is transportation. When MEC did its update of Blueprint Mississippi in 2011, one of the things that came to the forefront was resource management. How do we make sure that we're managing the infrastructure that we have in place? Secondly, through economic competitiveness, that infrastructure must be there for us to do what we need to do. So as we embarked on this, what we've determined is the best thing is we need to really start looking at a long-term comprehensive plan to allow us to deal with the transportation infrastructure issues that we have. And today we're going to delve a little bit deeper into that. We're going to talk about what some of the other states around the country are facing. We're going to talk a little bit about what industries that are impacted by this are dealing with, and really and truly kind of right here at home, why this is so important for us. This is a topic that without a doubt is something that we really need to be very diligent in looking at every aspect of it as we go forward. Our goal was to determine the needs and the priorities, look at what other people thought about it, figure out how all this played into the economic development process, how it played into safety, how it played into so many other factors that impact everybody's life here in Mississippi, and then come up with a long-term, comprehensive plan to make sure that we preserve and continue to grow our transportation infrastructure. Today, our panel is going to get into some details of that, and I'm going to introduce them real briefly because we got started a little bit late and we got on a tight time frame. But our main speaker today is Joe McAndrew. Joe is the Policy Director for Transportation for America. He came in from D.C. Last night, and we'll tell a little bit about what's going on in that arena as well as what he's seeing in other states. Prior to joining Transportation for America, he worked on behalf of Lane Transit District and the interest in the state of Oregon. He's also worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation. He's actually from Iowa, but he ended up in Oregon for a while. And he really is one of those people that has gotten a great understanding of it, both at the local level, the state level, and the national level. So we're very, very fortunate to have him here. Also with us at the far end of the table is Elizabeth Kennedy Lawler. She is with Norfolk Southern. She is the resident vice president. She oversees legislative activities in several states, including Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Tennessee. In her capacity there, she is past president of the Mississippi Railroad Association. So she's very familiar with what's going on in Mississippi and what we're facing, both with the Class I railroads, the short line railroads, and others. Prior to joining Norfolk, she was the Legislative Affairs Director at the Business Council of Alabama, our counterparts to MEC over in Alabama. I got to know Elizabeth then, and what a great job she did for them and is now doing for Norfolk. She's a graduate of Auburn University and has a master's of Public Administration from Auburn and a bachelor's from Birmingham Southern. Wilson Reisinger has over 28 years of trucking experience. He is currently at KLLM as the Vice President of Safety and Risk Management. His job, he's over all claims management responsibilities, including workers' compensation, insurance, as well as having the ultimate responsibility for safety for the company. KLLM, as many of you know, is based here in Jackson, and they're a nationwide carrier. And then finally, Chip Morgan from the Delta Council. Anybody that's had anything to do with transportation in Mississippi knows Chip. There may not be a better expert on transportation in this state than Chip, and he really was very instrumental in helping work through the issues many years ago in the 1987 Transportation Road Plan Ahead. And many, you know, that was designed to build the 4-lane system here in Mississippi that we really has put us on the map in terms of being able to attract companies and actually move around the state. The goal now is Chip is working with us on that Blueprint Mississippi study to talk about how do we preserve that infrastructure. His work at the Delta Council began in 1985. The Delta Council has a wide range of issues they work on, including agriculture, business, and really just a really good, strong organization for the Mississippi Delta. So that's our panel. We're going to kick it off with Joe, and thank y'all for being here. Joe?
Thank you very much, Scott. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe McAndrew. I'm the Policy Director at Transportation for America. I'm excited to be here today to both inform you about what other states are doing to increase transportation revenue throughout the country, but also inform you of a few trends that I think Mississippi should consider if and when you guys are ready to tackle the tricky political question that is raising transportation revenue. But first, about Transportation for America. Transportation for America is a national coalition of local elected officials, chambers of commerce, businesses, as well as civic organizations throughout the country trying to work to ensure that the federal government, the state governments, as well as local leaders have the tools and resources they need to ensure that they're able to address the transportation infrastructure challenges of the day. The list behind me is the Advisory Board for Transportation for America. As I said, we work at all levels of government helping elected officials and others solve the tricky transportation questions. This includes work at the state level. Last November, we launched the State Transportation Advocacy Research and Training Network, the START Network, to support governors, state legislators, local elected officials, and advocates' efforts in passing state transportation funding packages, as well as policy solutions. To kick off the event, we held a conference in Denver last November, where we had more than 30 states represented, with folks from the governor's offices, state legislators, state DOTs, as well as business interests, where we ultimately talked about the successes and the failures that folks have seen in trying to tackle the question of how to raise transportation revenue, as well as provided valuable lessons to all involved. We've expanded upon that work this legislative session. I'll go ahead and tell you what we've done in a few states. But before we get there, I'm here to also tell you how we got to this place. It's important that we know how we got here in terms of inadequate transportation funding to maintain, let alone expand our transportation infrastructure system to address the 21st century challenges. So first, we've got a crisis in funding. I don't think that is a secret to anyone, but fortunately for you, the good news is Mississippi is not the only state in the country that is addressing this. Congress also has the same challenge as well. At the federal level, the gas tax was last raised in 1993, more than 2 decades ago, and has remained static at 18.4 cents per gallon ever since. Since before the mid-2000s, Congress started spending down its reserves by obligating more authority to states and to regional governments throughout the country than what was actually coming in with the gas tax. Without any action by Congress to raise transportation revenue or cut obligation authority, starting in 2006, they started transferring up to $60 billion now from the general fund to the nation's transportation trust fund to stave off insolvency. Most recently, last July, they transferred $11 billion from the general fund to the Transportation Trust Fund to ensure that we didn't run insolvent last August. They extended the Surface Transportation Program, MAP 21, to this May, next month. It expires at the end of next month, and I've got great news. Congress, shockingly, hasn't done anything to solve the problem. We're going to go ahead and we expect Congress to extend on a short-term basis MAP 21 and provide additional funding for the system through another general fund transfer. There's a few things that are important to note here. With Congress's action to continue to kick the can down the road, it does nothing for the state of Mississippi or the local elected leaders throughout the state to try to maintain and plan for Mississippi's transportation system, and only further burdens future generations in having to pay for the upkeep and reconstruction of the deteriorating system. Now, some folks want with the federal inaction happening at that level, some folks are clamoring for a devolution of the federal role in the transportation program, and I would advise that we don't go down that route. for many reasons, but I think the most glaring is the fact that should the federal government stop funding the state of Mississippi's needs through a federal gas tax, that is ultimately going to come down to the state of Mississippi to have to raise the gap just to maintain the status quo. You're already in a hole, then you're going to have to raise revenue just to get back to where you're at today. They expect that if the feds stopped their federal gas tax, Mississippi would have to raise their gas tax to the tune of about 20 cents. That would be more than doubling the current gas tax that you have today. It's a tough political battle to try to talk about additional money. Now you're talking about just filling the hole. So how did we get here? There's important information here of the deteriorating gas tax that we have. Americans are driving less. From the 1960s all the way up until about 2002, 2003, Americans were driving at an average growth of 2% vehicle miles traveled growth rate every year. Starting just before 2005, Americans stopped driving as many miles. Americans stopped driving as many miles per capita. They're starting to tick back up, but not to the rate that we expect or that we saw prior to the Great Recession. In fact, the Federal Highway Administration last year released a 30-year projected growth rate for the vehicle miles traveled to just 0.8% every year. What that ultimately means is that there's less people driving, there's less money coming into the system. Next, Americans are getting more with every gas. The cars are becoming more fuel efficient. While this is positive for the pocketbooks as well as for the environment, it means that there's less money coming in for each gallon of gas that is sold. This is only going to get worse. In 2012, the Obama administration nearly doubled the fuel efficiency standards for new passenger vehicles to a rate of almost 55 miles per gallon. That ultimately means that we're going to get half as much in return for the gas tax in future years. Next, construction costs have gone up. Since the last time that we raised the gas tax in 1993, construction costs on average have gone up by over 150%. And finally, inflation. Inflation has eaten away at the purchasing power of the gas tax. Since we last raised the gas tax in 1993, we've lost nearly 40% of the purchasing power of the gas tax. This all means that we've got challenges, right? That's the doom and gloom here. But there's also opportunities and a little bit of bright light, and that's oftentimes being led at the state and the local level. And I want to go ahead and share that with you, share a few examples with you here today. Sorry about the map, it didn't come through so well, but the map, the colored states that you see here, that's about 12 states from the start of the 2012 legislative session up until the start of this year that went ahead and raised transportation revenue in one way, shape, or form. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight a few states just to give you an example that there is no silver bullet for how the state of Mississippi may want to look to raise transportation revenue. Everybody's doing it a little bit differently. So the first state in Wyoming here, you've got a conservative Republican governor, you've got a conservative state legislature. Ultimately in 2013 looked around and said, there's a tax parity issue, as in Wyoming's gas tax is less than all states surrounding our borders, and we need to raise our gas tax. And they did so with little fuss by 10 cents in 2013. Pennsylvania also last year went ahead and raised their transportation, or passed their transportation revenue package that will raise almost $2.3 billion in additional revenue over 5 years. I think there's a couple things that are important to note from Pennsylvania that other folks have started to follow as well. Pennsylvania did away with their gas tax entirely and moved it over to a sales tax at the wholesale level. And what happens when you do that is that as the price of gasoline goes up, it allows for a natural indexing or inflationary fee for the gas tax to occur. However, in recent months, the gas tax has gone down, and Pennsylvania learned from others that had made mistakes ahead of them and set up a floor mechanism so that when the price of gasoline per gallon goes below a certain rate, they can go ahead and set a floor where they have a guaranteed, stable, predictable incoming revenue flow. I think another important piece of information that Pennsylvania included that I think a lot of states are starting to look to is in their bill, they included nearly $150 million in a multimodal competitive grant program. Not all too different than the federal Tiger program, if you know what that is. What it does is it allows local elected officials, for-profit as well as nonprofit transportation entities to compete for funds on an annual basis. Prior to inclusion of this in the bill, as well as a few other items, the governor and the secretary of the DOT had traveled around the state for over a year saying that the sky was falling. And that ultimately wasn't enough to get the necessary votes from the state legislature to pass the transportation revenue package. It was items such as a competitive grant program, such as that allowed for everybody in the transportation stakeholder realm, including air and rail, as well as ports, to be able to see them in the bill and help push for final passage. In fact, the program became so popular to the state legislators, the secretary of the DOT proposed a $100 million program. When it's fully ramped up in a couple years, the legislature bumped it up to $150 million. Next, Virginia, in 2012, went ahead and took the lead in passing a transportation revenue package. They too followed something similar to what Pennsylvania did in removing their gas tax and moving it to a sales tax at the wholesale level of gasoline sales. They also raised a whole slew of other fees to be able to make up the difference that they needed. Massachusetts also last year raised their gas tax a couple cents and indexed it to inflation. Now there's an important bit of information for Massachusetts here. They went ahead and indexed their gas tax to inflation, which is an important thing for the legislature not to have to come back 4, 5, 6 years from now and have to take the tough, tricky vote again. And so what they did was they indexed it to inflation. However, the general public, as well as the current governor, took opposition to that. They included a ballot referendum on last fall's ballot, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the state's not going to be able to expect to receive the total $4.4 billion because the people defeated the indexing of the gas tax. Next, from all of this, Transportation for America did a review of all states that raised transportation revenue and really found some lessons, and included in a report called Capital Ideas that we released in February were lessons that we thought were special ingredients that we found over and over and over again in a number of states, that I want to go ahead and highlight 3 of these items that I think that Mississippi should consider if and when they're ready to go for additional transportation revenue. 1, you need to gain support from the local elected officials. 2, it's not enough just to ask for new transportation revenue, but rather you need to match the revenue package with policy that ensures better accountability and transparency for how those funds will be spent. And 3rd, and finally, and possibly more important in some of this stuff, is that you have to have the governor and other statewide elected officials behind and pushing the transportation revenue package. I'll go ahead and highlight these 3 just a little bit here in depth. The local elected officials. When you ask citizens throughout the country who they most trust of their elected officials, they say it's their local elected officials. It's because they know who they are, they know where to go find them, whether it be at the grocery store or at church on Sunday. And so these are a natural advocacy base for any transportation revenue package. So you need to make sure that their interests and priorities are seen within this bill. And there are different ways to do it. One would be a competitive grant bill. Another would be local enabling options. But there are different ways and mechanisms to make sure that their interests are seen. Next, you need to ensure that there's greater transparency and accountability in how these funds are going to be spent. You're facing an uphill battle. When polled, 85% of Americans throughout the country, when asked, are transportation decisions made more on need or on politics, they'll respond that they believe that transportation decisions and investment decisions are made based on politics. That is a major hurdle that anybody has to overcome, and it takes dogged messaging and coalition building to do so, but it also takes the right policy. You need to have policy in place that goes ahead and ensures that the funds are being spent on what they're being promised, what the taxpayers are being promised. And then finally, you need to ultimately have the governor and other statewide elected officials on board with the funding package. It's not enough for them just to say that it's We generally support it, but we're not going to push it. Quite often when that happens, bills go ahead and squander in the House or the Senate, and they never ever seem to gain the focus or momentum that's necessary to get it through both chambers and onto the governor's desk. So here's an important stat that I don't know how many state representatives we have in the room here today, but I'd like for everybody to go ahead and share this information with them. Again, the map is not so great here, but of those 12 states that raised transportation revenue from 2012 up until the beginning of this year, 98% of those that voted for a transportation revenue increase won their next primary. Democrats and Republicans, 98% won their next primary. What this tells me is that the electorate is forgiving should you build the trust with them and they understand what they are getting for in their investment. So that gets me to this year. There was great momentum leading up to it, and there's great momentum happening currently in state capitals throughout the country. You can't really see it here. The light blue, there's almost 24 states in the country have active transportation revenue packages before their legislature at this moment, or had. Some of them are already done, I believe including Mississippi. But there are a number of states that have actually been successful. Idaho, Utah, South Dakota, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Georgia. All generally pretty conservative Republican states, being successful in raising additional transportation revenue. I expect that there'll be a few more before we're all said and done. I'm going to go ahead and highlight just 2 states here, just to give you another example of how they're going about raising transportation revenue. Iowa went ahead and raised their gas tax 10 cents. It took the governor's focus and attention to be able to get this done. They haven't raised the gas tax since 1989, the last time Governor Terry Branstad was in office, the same governor we currently have there in the state. For 5 years, a coalition of folks led by Chambers and others tried hard to gain the momentum necessary to increase transportation revenue. However, at the end of the day, it never gained traction. The governor went ahead and worked on a bipartisan basis to get the split legislature to get split bipartisan votes to get this bill done. The bill passed in February, making them the first state this year to raise transportation revenue, and it was ultimately the 10 cents went into effect in March. So they're already reaping benefits and able to invest those funds this construction season. Next, Georgia, not too far down the road, went ahead and raised their transportation revenue package, or passed their transportation revenue package right before leaving a few weeks ago. They went ahead and, or they expect to reap the benefit of almost $1 billion in additional revenue every year going forth. They went ahead and moved some sales tax funds over to the excise gas tax, and ultimately indexed their gas tax to inflation by the fuel, using 2 different items. One would be the fuel efficiency of the state's vehicle fleet, as well as due to inflation. So that's the good news. There are many states that can provide you the roadmap of how to do what you need to do. But beyond that, the state of Mississippi must ensure any and all funds raised from a future transportation revenue package is spent wisely, maintaining what you have and investing in a system for the 21st century. And what gets me to my next point, and that gets me to my next point, the demands on our transportation system are changing, and we must ensure we don't pile new money into 1960s era's highway investments. Some folks might laugh about this, but a region's most important source of competitive advantage is its workforce. I imagine most folks in this room understand that fact. But in the past, employers attracted workers to the jobs, but that's changing. According to many studies, the pool of talent is now attracting firms to locations. The vast majority of college-educated young people choose where they want to live based on factors other than employment opportunities. In fact, a study we did last year with the Rockefeller Foundation found that 4 out of 5 millennials want to live in places with transportation options. This is important to understand if you want to have the workforce to be able to compete for jobs of the future, for those kids that don't even understand what AOL even was. You know, as seen by this chart, it's about a year or 2 old. Millennials now make up the largest demographic in the country, And the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics expects that millennials will surpass baby boomers this year as the largest demographic in the workforce. As a millennial myself, I feel that I can speak from experience in stating that we live our lives just a wee bit different from those that came before us. We have different demands and expectations on our employers, from our cities, and what we want in terms of entertainment. And employers and transportation leaders throughout the country are starting to take note. The following corporations have made decisions or have announced decisions to relocate their corporate headquarters from suburban campuses to more walkable mixed-use locations in the last year. In fact, Marriott, located in Maryland, has announced that they're going to go ahead and move their location in the coming years. And two central important factors wherever they go is that they're going to locate their corporate headquarters near transit and in a walkable mixed-use area, because they need that to ensure that they can attract the talent for the future. Transportation leaders are also waking up. Just this last week, the Illinois DOT secretary was quoted saying, "The idea of transportation choice is necessary for us to attract the millennial generation, the workers. They want a certain type of community, they want a certain type of lifestyle." And just the other day, the Minnesota Senate chairman of the Transportation Committee, upon passage of his transportation revenue package in the Senate, was quoted as saying, "We're losing our young people." Why? Because they're moving to places with amenities, the kind of transportation choices they're looking for. Now, I understand there's a great divide between what those states have and what Mississippi have, but that doesn't mean that you can't think differently about the investments to be able to make those walkable main streets more livable, more friendly to try to attract and retain the talent that you guys are educating every year. So with that, I just want to go ahead and leave a couple takeaways for you. First, you're not alone. Don't be scared. You can learn from others. We're here to help. Next, the situation that you find yourself in isn't getting any better, and action must be taken. Third, you must build a strong, diverse coalition of interests that everybody sees themselves in the revenue package. It must be supported by the governor as well as other statewide officials, and messaging as well as having the appropriate messengers to educate the public is a must. Next, it's not enough just to raise revenue, but you also must improve accountability to ensure that the taxpayer funds are going to go towards the investments that are based on need and not on politics. And then finally, voters will understand and will support those who take the tough vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. And again, that's what a good snapshot of kind of what's going on around the country. And you know, we have been faced with this over the last few years. And Chip, as I mentioned earlier, you were very involved in the AHEAD program in '87. Tell us just briefly, if you would, kind of what that meant for Mississippi to have that four-lane system put in place for us here.
Well, I think I can only speak specifically to the region of the state we work in, but I believe it's true all over the state. We have businesses located on four-lane highways and improved two-lane highways that simply would not be there. Dollar General has a distribution center, and they've got it on a four-lane, and they employ a lot of people and pay very good wages. They would not be in Indianola, Mississippi if the '87 program had been there. Today, on the other hand, we've got companies operating in Tupelo and Clarksdale on opposite sides of the state that have two plants, and they've got to go to Memphis because of the condition of roads and bridges on Highway 6 in North Mississippi. I don't imagine they can remain competitive if they're going to have to go to Shelby County, Tennessee, to get to Tupelo from Clarksdale. So those kind of experiences tell us it's time, Joe.
Well, that was my next question, really, in terms of its time. I mean, how important is it that we look at this and preserve this infrastructure and continue to grow it?
Well, the infrastructure need is increasing fast now. We've got $4 billion worth of infrastructure needs just in roads and bridges today, according to the data MEC is looking at the Infrastructure Committee. So it's not getting cheaper. And obviously the deterioration, when you've got over 1,000 structurally deficient bridges in your state, which means a trucker who's carrying commerce can't cross it with a legal weight. He can put 80,000 pounds on his truck, but he can't drive on the road. We got a law that says you can carry 80,000 pounds, but you can't. And so it's stymieing commerce in our area. We've got grain elevators in our agriculture area of the state that this year are booking grain to go to the port of Memphis because they cannot get to the Mississippi River.
Well, and I guess that's one of the kind of the question I was talking about. The impact on the agriculture sector's got to be very difficult given the bridge situation, particularly where we are.
It is, and it's seasonal. So you've got a 3-month window to do that at harvest time. The manufacturing sector's got the problem every single day.
Well, that kind of leads to my final question. You know, the research we're doing with the Blueprint study has shown, particularly in the Delta, there's a large number of bridges that are problematic. In our statewide meetings, we're starting to see people are saying about 83% of the people we poll say this has to be our number one issue in maintaining our roads and bridges. Do you also see that as the top priority as we go forward looking at this long-term plan we're talking about?
The business community in Northwest Mississippi believes that there's no other issue that holds priority over this issue.
Thank you, Chip. Wilson, as a national carrier, I guess I'll get to know a little bit about what's going on in a lot of states, both with safety and travel issues. Can you basically give us just kind of a quick overview about how transportation infrastructure impacts the trucking industry?
Sure. Obviously, transportation infrastructure have a wide variety of impacts on the transportation industry. A couple of things Chip mentioned there. Roads and bridges that aren't up to capacity to accommodate trucking, 80,000 pounds. You mentioned harvest permit. We have some trucks in the forest products part. It's not seasonal. They run a harvest even more than 80,000 pounds year round. So anytime that has a delay, it can impact a carrier through cost. It can impact a customer through not being able to get products they need. There's a wide variety. Poor roads can impact damage on product. If the conditions are bad enough, we have product damage claims at delivery due to poor roads. Safety issues, which I think we're going to talk a little bit more about.
Well, you mentioned those extra costs. I mean, I'm assuming I'm correct when you talk about there's lost productivity, there's added cost for repairs to trucks or damage to goods. I mean, that negatively impacts your customer, but ultimately the end consumer is also impacted in that process, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Poor roads will have a dramatic or exaggerated effect on maintenance, tires, wheels, suspension parts, steering parts, all those things that normally may have when you buy it, have a certain life expectancy, but you run on a lot of bad roads for an extended period of time, and it shortens the life of all those parts, especially tires and wheels. In addition, roads to that type of cost, there's also, we've had workers' comp claims, injury from driver bouncing down the road, if the road was bad enough, that sort of thing. We've had, most of the costs in the transportation business are mileage related. So anytime, if you can't use, as Chip was talking about this company having to run to Shelby County to get to another location, if you're adding miles, you probably have a customer who doesn't want to pay you. They're looking at a map going point A to point B, it's this many miles, this is what I ought to be charged. But you've got to run out of route or around the bridge, one of the 1,000 bridges that isn't adequate to support the 80,000 pound truck. More miles add cost to the industry. It can impact your customer. even your drivers, if a driver, a lot of times issues are not necessarily updated on maps or in GPS, so the driver doesn't know there's an issue till he gets to that point, and then he's got to reroute and detour and go somewhere else, and it adds time. Now he can't make a delivery because he's limited on how many hours he can operate in a day or in a week. You have to reschedule that. Customer didn't get their product. Consumer maybe couldn't find it on the shelf. Customer lost some market share. It's a ripple effect that the transportation industry can have on the whole economic cycle.
Let's take about 1 minute and talk about safety. There's probably nothing more important to you than safety, correct?
Absolutely not. Safety would be the
Tell me a little bit about how road conditions play into that.
first priority for KLM, and I hope all trucking companies, is safety. We devote a lot of time and money in technology on our trucks to put the safest drivers and trucks we can out on the road. But if you're on a bad road, I think we've all been on some roads where heavy equipment has put ruts down the road that can cause somebody to lose control. Big potholes can cause a driver, not just a truck driver, any driver, to maybe have a blowout, lose control. Some of the things that I see that I know are helpful for us are reflective lane markers. Really help a driver at night be able to maintain lane integrity. Rumble strips on the shoulder, on the fog line, letting the driver know that he's drifted, are things that help us. All of those, anything that we can do with our highways or our bridges to make them safer for transportation are important to our industry.
Thank you. Elizabeth, as I mentioned in your bio, in your job at Norfolk Southern, you are the past president of the Mississippi Railroad Association, giving you a really good knowledge of what's going on in Mississippi. Can you tell us a little bit about the role that rail plays in creating a strong transportation system?
Can I do a little bit of that with my slides?
You bet.
Okay. I'm a picture person, folks. Do you want me to start talking about it with the intermodal end?
Well,
or you want to
let's talk a little bit, if you will, kind of how intermodal all fits into this and how it all comes together.
Okay, I'm going to stand so that I can see my slides behind me. In talking about intermodal, what these gentlemen have just been talking a good bit about is mixed freight type and agriculture products. They also both deal a lot in intermodal, which is your container freight. When you see containers on chassis out on the interstate, that's container freight. A lot of that freight comes to us from trucking, our trucking partners in Mississippi and other states, to the railroad. We consider the truckers our partners, and they are our short line partners in trying to get the container freight from the shipper to the railroad. This is a slide. It says intermodal facility. I couldn't edit it. But this talks a little bit about what an intermodal facility is for a railroad. And it's what you would imagine if you had a truck playset at home. Short haul truck comes in. We have a chassis here, the yellow chassis, the yellow crane that loads the container, puts it on the chassis, double stack, and does the long haul. We consider long haul to be 700 miles or more. It doesn't make sense to take something from Tupelo, Mississippi to Memphis, Tennessee on a train. It would make sense for a truck to get it to a facility in Memphis, and load it. This is a partnership of getting products from point A to point B using our trucking partners. You can compare this a little bit to your passenger. Many of you don't think of taking a trip as being intermodal, but when you drive your car and park at a train station and get on a train in order to take a train down to New Orleans to catch a ship on a cruise, you've just traveled intermodal. Same thing when you translate that from people, shipping freight people, we ship products this way, and that's how that looks. Now we have a full network, and in order to explain to you what an intermodal network looks like, I kind of need to draw a picture for you of what a railroad network looks like. This is 140,000 route miles of railroads in the United States of America. Yes, we do have railroad down here, and again, my map doesn't show up either, Joe. Down here, this is Alaska, and actually we do have railroad in Hawaii. The different colors represent different railroad individual companies. There are 7 Class 1s. They're the ones that you would recognize: Norfolk Southern, NS, BNSF, CSX, CN, CP, KCS, and UP. We play alphabet soup on the radio, on the railroad. The way in which we ship is we each individually railroad have our own network that we connect or interconnect with other railroads to get your products to another part of the country or to a port to go internationally. This year alone, in 2015, the railroads collectively are investing $29 billion in our infrastructure to keep it maintained and to expand it, to increase capacity, and to maintain safety. So if you look at Mississippi, Mississippi has got a model state in terms of the amount of railroad network that you have. The different colors, again, are the different Class 1 railroads. The light gray lines are your short lines. Up here on your right, I just threw a few statistics so you'd have an idea of what kind of investment you have in your infrastructure, and it's very, very strong. 27 freight railroads, that's 5 of those are the Class 1s, the large ones. If you know it's a Class 1, if you see them run across your ticker tape on CNBC, that's generally a Class 1. Number of employees, railroad retirement, and rail traffic, just trivia for you to look. This is where our short line partners, much like our trucking partners, work with us. They're our first mile and last mile. You've got 22 short lines in the state of Mississippi that your legislature and your DOT strongly support and provide resources to. They are the economic backbone of your state, and they bring products from manufacturers to our Class 1 railroads, and then we can ship them anywhere in the world. So just to give you an idea, here's the Norfolk Southern footprint. We're east of the Mississippi. The Mississippi provides a natural barrier for railroads, obviously. You can only cross it in so many places. So this is what our intermodal network looks like for the southeastern United States. Norfolk Southern has created over the past 6 years 4 corridors of transportation that create specific lanes for products. This is considered the Crescent Corridor footprint. Its anchor comes out of New Orleans, but 2 of our key facilities are in Memphis and in Birmingham, and they serve your Mississippi market for intermodal traffic. Now I want you to take a notice, and you can see where our railroad tracks are, that they actually parallel interstates. And that's intentionally. We've developed those routes because those are actual trucking routes, long-haul trucking routes, that we're partnering with the trucking companies. So they do the short haul, and we actually do the long haul. When you're talking about development and maintaining roadways, for railroads, it costs between $3 to $5 million for 1 mile of single track, $3 to $5 million. For 2 lanes of interstate, flat, it's $25 million. $25 million in public dollar investment versus $3 to $5 million of private railroad money. Norfolk Southern is investing $2.9 billion alone in our network in 2015. That's private dollars. That's 40 cents per revenue dollar that we earn to maintain our own infrastructure. So it's a cost saving to taxpayers when you're able to ship by rail. So in looking at that type of map following the interstates, these are the key facilities along that route that are major hubs. It's sort of thinking about the Atlanta airport, where people feed into the Atlanta airport and then spoke and wheel. That's how we operate these. Do you want me to tell some statistics?
Yeah, show the next slide you have there.
And then let me share with you KCS. KCS is a partner with Norfolk Southern in Mississippi. They have the only intermodal terminal in Mississippi. It's here in Jackson. So unfortunately, their map that they provided me does not have the interstate parallels, but I think you know it well enough to see where they go. They actually have access down into Mexico, and then this is the Norfolk Southern line that goes through Atlanta and up. So we interchange in Meridian, Mississippi, and so they're able to serve there. For Norfolk Southern, your 2 major facilities for Norfolk Southern that serves the Mississippi market, one's in Memphis, which is the Memphis Regional Facility. It is currently at 123,000 lifts. That means lifts per container onto a chassis. And the capacity there is 200,000 per year. In Birmingham, our lifts are at 34,000 with a capacity of 100,000. And for KCS here in Jackson, they're at 22,500 lifts, and they got 31,700 capacity. So there's a lot of room for growth for intermodal traffic in the Mississippi market. We would all like to have it.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. As you see, that all of these different industries are tied together. I mean, this is all something that when we talk about doing this, we're talking about a comprehensive look at transportation, not just roads, not just bridges. We understand that's the top priority that we face here in Mississippi. But there are a lot of other things that have to be taken in consideration. So as we move forward on this process, we're going to continue to keep everybody informed. We're going to continue to look at all options. The report that the Blueprint Transportation Study is doing will be released in November, and we'll have a whole lot more information there. We'll be sharing that with you along the way.